So this video is going to look at the first Berlin crisis, 1940. Background to it in terms of the Berlin crisis. So in Potsdam in 1945, it had been agreed that Germany would be divided into four. There would be four separate zones of occupation: a Soviet zone, a British zone, an American zone, and a French zone. Berlin, however, was deep in the Soviet zone. But because of its prestige as the capital city of Germany, it was decided that the city would also be divided into four sectors. So you have a situation whereby the capital city, Berlin, is controlled by the four powers, but is deep inside of a Soviet-controlled area. In June 1948, Britain, the USA, and France made a decision that they were going to merge their zones together into one area called Trizonia. This would eventually form West Germany, but that was not necessarily the plan at that point. Now, the idea was that this would drastically improve economic recovery in the West. It would actually allow them to maximise the use of money from the Marshall Plan, because it could be centralised and focused on this united country. Now, Stalin opposed this for two reasons. One is that he wants a weak Germany. Because of his paranoia and because of his fear of an invasion, he genuinely believed that the capitalist West is trying to make a strong West Germany that could be used to attack the USSR. So his paranoia is convincing him that this is a step towards an invasion of the Soviet Union. And remember, feeding into this, we've had the martial law distributed across Europe. We've had the Novikov telegram, where his own ambassador has told him that the USA is planning world domination and is building up its army in order to attack the Soviet Union. So he sees this as the first step towards an invasion. What he was also worried about, and the other reason he opposed it, was that if the Western zones recovered much quicker than the East and had much stronger economies, it would make the communist-controlled East a less desirable place to live, which was, of course, the entire plan of the Western Allies in that sense. Remember, Marshall Aid was all about improving economies, getting rapid growth, rapid expansion, and to improve living standards and make capitalism seem far more appealing than communism. So the Berlin Blockade. June 24th, 1948, the Soviet Union blocks all road and rail routes into West Berlin, cutting these areas off from West Germany. It's now completely impossible for any supplies to reach the British, American, and French zones. Now, Stalin hopes this is going to lead to an abandonment of Berlin. The Western capitalist nations would be forced to leave Berlin because they'd have no food, they'd have no fuel to light fires with. And so without those things, they literally would not be able to stay. And what that would allow for is a communist takeover of the city, which would make the Soviet Union look more powerful. And remember, fits into that idea that Stalin has of spreading communism. We've seen it in Eastern Europe. We've seen it with East Germany. We're now seeing Stalin trying to get rid of this tiny outpost of capitalism inside of the Soviet zone and make the Soviet Union look powerful. Now, the USA couldn't abandon Berlin. The reason for this is the Truman Doctrine and the policy of containment. This is the perfect opportunity now for America to show the world they are serious about containing communism. Therefore, they couldn't just abandon it. And so they're going to have to find a way to overcome the Berlin blockade and ensure that American, British, and French troops can remain in. So initially, the US commander in Germany, General Gage, comes up with the idea that all they're going to do, they're getting an armed convoy and they're going to drive it at Berlin. They're going to drive it down the road and we will force the Red Army out of the way. Gage believed the Red Army would not open fire, and that if they were confronted by an armed American convoy, they would move. However, Truman rejected this because it could quickly start a war, even if it was completely unintentional. All it would have taken is for one American or Red Army soldier to slip over, to drop their weapon, to accidentally pull the trigger and fire a round by mistake, and the opposition would believe it was intentional, and that would start a war which would lead to potentially millions of casualties on both sides. So, the alternative. June 26th, 1948, they launch Operation Vittles. In essence, supplies would be flown into Berlin. Now, crucially, the USSR can't shoot these planes down. They couldn't simply just open fire on them because it would start a war. It would be an unprovoked attack on unarmed aircraft. And with America having the atomic bomb, the USSR didn't want to start a war. They didn't have the overwhelming military advantage in terms of technology that they needed to be guaranteed to win. And what Truman does is he moves the B-29 bombers, the bombers that are large enough to carry an atomic weapon deep into the Soviet Union, to Britain, in order to intimidate the USSR, in order to send a message that if Stalin escalates the conflict, atomic weapons will be used. But crucially, Operation Vittles allows 275,000 flights to land in Berlin. It brings 1.5 million tons of supplies, of food, of fuel, of clothing, of all the day-to-day essentials Berliners needed to survive. Crucially, by April 1949, 13,000 tons of supplies were landing a day. Berlin only needed 6,000 tons, so actually Berlin is getting more than double what it needs to survive on a daily basis, meaning that the blockade has been completely ineffective, that Stalin's plan has not worked because he has no way of stopping these flights, which took the combined air forces of America, of Britain, of France, planes from Canada were brought in. It took an enormous material strength to do this, something that the Soviet Union perhaps wouldn't have been able to do with its weakened economy, but it worked for the capitalists. And what it means is that the plan to starve Berlin doesn't work. And so crucially, on May the 11th, 1949, the blockade is lifted. Okay, it becomes clear they can't starve West Berlin into submission. And they were seeing aircraft landing within seconds of each other, being pushed off of runways, unloaded and taking off again in order to get the supplies in. So it just hasn't worked. However, the USA and the UK actually carry on stockpiling supplies, and they carry this on until September, just in case the Soviets chose to blockade the city again. What they were worried about is that the Soviets were going to redeploy the blockade in a month or two after supplies had dropped again. So they build up now a tactical reserve that can be used if Stalin tries this again. Now, it makes the USA look incredibly powerful because the USSR had failed. They hadn't forced them to leave West Berlin. There's some US academics who think that had the Soviet Union not made a massive deal about Berlin, America may have abandoned it in time anyway. But because it had become a flashpoint, a point of confrontation between the two powers, America couldn't back down. One of the big things it does, however, is shows that the USA is willing to back up the Truman Doctrine, that they've stopped and they've contained the spread of communism, which increases the faith that other countries had in the USA, because they are willing to carry out what they said they would do, which again is a key reason why America could not abandon Berlin. Had they abandoned Berlin, those words that Truman had said in 1947 and the statements and the arguments for backing America would have dissolved, because people would have looked at America and gone, you don't carry out on your promises. You promised to stop communism from spreading and you haven't. So it's a really, really important example of the Truman Doctrine, and one of the first times America does it in direct defense of an area that they control. So, the consequences of the first Berlin crisis. NATO is formed. Okay, a military alliance in the West that was meant to keep the USA in and the USSR out. Okay, NATO standing for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Basically, if a NATO country came under attack, then all NATO countries would come to their defense. NATO still being a huge part of Western defense today. And in fact, there are British troops deployed in Eastern Europe, in Estonia and in Lithuania, as part of a NATO commitment to facing down Russian aggression. So it's a defensive mechanism for Western Europe, for the military. The Warsaw Pact is then formed in 1955, which was a military alliance between the USSR and the Eastern European nations, those satellite states, that if any of them were attacked, that all countries would unite together in order to fight back and defend themselves. And so you have two huge military organizations that are created as a result of the First Berlin Crisis. NATO in the west and the Warsaw Pact in the east. In September 1949, America, Britain and France also united their zones from Trizonia into the Federal Republic of Germany, or West Germany, as it was more commonly known, creating that unified German country that Stalin was so fearful of. So in response, in October 1949, Stalin sets up the Democratic Republic, or the German Democratic Republic, the GDR, otherwise known as East Germany. He did, however, carry on stripping it of resources. In order to rebuild the Soviet Union, took apart German factories, took apart German farms, took any equipment that the Soviets needed and moved it east in order to rebuild them at the expense of Germany. What this means, however, is that many East Germans escaped to the west via aircraft, via the road and via rail routes leading out of West Berlin. So the idea being to escape East Germany because Stalin is taking away their standard of living.